Only a few cinematographers or film directors, in my research experience, have openly extolled their art form as intended to promote violence, I assume gangster violence, since these men and women are not in government, beneficial to themselves. The only one I can think of offhand who made an off the cuff remark to that effect was the director of the French neo fascist film Diva, which has been deeply implicated in the semiotics of the Axis plot in the Texas school book that I unearthed while investigating another macabre crime dimension as a medical library clerk in the 80s. Obviously, when somebody goes to see The Godfather, whatever their disinclination for the violence may be, or admiration for example, Marlon Brando may be, few respectable viewers say to themselves with a laugh, I bet that's what those actors and actresses really do behind the scenes. It's not meant to be that way. Hollywood is meant to be a foundation where people are used in imagery to tell a story that sometimes is based on true events, other times is purely fictitious, but never actually harming anyone else. That's the sort of unwritten rule of Hollywood. Now, those who know my research realize that the basic premise is that um, unprovoked and reprehensible violent acts have been whipped up by Hollywood itself to promote itself, to give itself stories to tell. And this is networked among billionaire politicians controlled by huge media gangs. And those who know me well enough to know where my book stands on the subject of Lenin also know that I believe that Lenin was the um, ultimate Houdini magic show, that we were led to believe he died when he was secretly evacuated by the billionaire media gang who have him in place as part of a freehand overthrow syndicate of neo-fascism that is a multicultural alliance, an arc of colors, a celebrity superstate that is inclusive not of the masses, not of the public, but as select representatives of each race, the talented tenth, the boys we call them. And of course, I pose this, and my gesture in discussing this today is to help me focus on what I know and how difficult it is of a balancing act to go into each and every particular in hopes that by thinking about this tape and watching it later, I might be able to, as they say, connect the dots a little better. Themes have emerged in a period of gestation that is its own chronology. In other words, if I started with the semiotics of Reagan's gang that trace back to the rise of Hollywood and the way that the defeated reasserted its power after the Civil War, and that did so again after World War II through the same gang and the same system. I would put that first in terms of my discovery as a researcher and the super story that it um, revealed operating in the background of international cinema about Kennedy's assassination, the escape of Adolf Hitler, and what they were calling Two Virgins Pussy Bowl, which was clocked to the AIDS attack, a eugenic war game of triumph of the black man over the Japanese who had rejected the white. This narrative super story is encrypted in the background all through the 50s and 60s. Japanese cinema, German cinema, all the associates of the Axis, known as UFA, a media starlet of whom Ingrid Bergman appeared as one of my friends, Martha Gellhorn, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, and starred in Casablanca, telling me as a member of an underground who used a double cross as their symbol. UFA, of course, was the subject of several new textbooks on Hitler and Hollywood and their relations. But my research for Community College of Allegheny County was intended to fill in an oversight, the fact that Reagan did not appear in any of these indexes. If I started there, what would come afterwards is chronology about the origins of how this happened, beginning in 1916. The 20s and the 10s of the 20th century was when D.W. Griffith was introduced to the Italian futurists and Mussolini. I meant like Freddie, Luigi, and Marinetti, who had a futurist manifesto where many of the issues that came to fruition with the disappearing act of Lenin, the famous Houdini I've disclosed, were initially suggested and planned. The Ouspensky team around Picasso went into fourth dimensional psychology. They were called the Cubist movement. The Italian futurists were an offshoot, a fascist offshoot of the Cubist movement. One of the literary figures of the times, Blas Sanders, had lost an arm in World War I. It helped facilitate his idea that cinema was a form of literature that, like Cubism, adjusted reality in pursuit of what they considered a greater truth. His lack of one arm gave them the idea of a hidden hand in Hollywood, operating in reality like a fourth dimensional puppet show. To have this kind of thinking fall on the desks of men like D.W. Griffith, Benito Mussolini, Walt Disney, and Sergei Eisenstein during the era of Houdini and the politics of Ouspensky, and think that they did not notice the implications that this facilitated is absurd. However, a strange silence falls over the idea, a silence as conspicuous as the semiotic superstory I have disclosed. It's a silence that says they didn't fail to see the implications. They simply closed the door and kept it among the Hollywood elite, the filmmaking elite, what I call the leapfrog oligarchs of superpower, money, and influence who operate behind the scenes, manipulating international politics as though nation states are yachts they can exchange on the international exchequer board. My goal is to remedy this by bringing administration and review over Hollywood. Hollywood should return to an era where ethical review is enforced over the practices of the directors and actors involved. We've seen how obscure little manias like the rock music's fascination with Aleister Crowley, Edgar Casey, and P.D. Ouspensky has led to huge media gangs who use Cubist falsification to tell their master narratives. It must be made against the law. We must have fact checkers. We must have reviewers of what's being instigated. But most of all, we need to look into the actual practices of the bandits who have hardwired from access into Hollywood and stabbed us in the back. That's what my goal is. I'm looking at it from a number of different angles. There's a book I found by a person who was recommended to me at the time when a lot of people were laughing about the script that was secreted on my person as a child who was tortured. His name was Colin Wilson, and it's about paranormal crime. We must never allow the idea of paranormal crime to become intoxicated to the media gangs surrounding billionaire politicians ever again. They've done too much harm to our public sensibilities, our right to know laws, and our sanity as a democratic society. So I'm asking Congress to summon the courage to stand up to Hollywood and have an administration that watches over Hollywood's practices and makes sure that they are a healthy rather than a hazardous member of American society and the international community.